Midnight on a desolate road near the southern Lebanese town of Bint Jbeil, a convoy crept forward under the cover of silence. Inside one of the vehicles, a Mossad operative tapped nervously on his encrypted device, sending what he believed was a routine surveillance update. What he didn't know was that Hezbollah's counterintelligence had already tapped the line, triangulated his signal, and was closing in. Within minutes, headlights flared across the hillside. His carefully concealed mission was about to be blown wide open. Before I tell you what happened next, if you've been holding your breath like I have, make sure you're subscribed. These declassified files drop every day. If you love Spy Wars like this, hit that button so you don't miss the next classified file. And tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? To understand why Mossad and Hezbollah are locked in this shadow war, you need to rewind nearly 2 decades. In the aftermath of the 2006 Lebanon War, Israel and Hezbollah never declared peace. Instead, they fought in silence, through covert operations, cyber infiltration, targeted assassinations, and intelligence gathering. The front line was no longer marked by tanks and soldiers, but by hidden cameras, intercepted signals, and operatives who could vanish into thin air. For Mossad, Hezbollah represented one of the most dangerous non-state actors in the region, well-armed, well-trained, and supported by Iran. Every year, Hezbollah's arsenal grew. More rockets, more drones, more advanced surveillance. Israel, unable to tolerate this threat on its northern border, made it a top priority to dismantle Hezbollah's leadership and disrupt its networks. For Hezbollah, Mossad was the phantom enemy, slipping operatives into Lebanese soil, hunting their commanders, and using technology to peer into their strongholds. The group knew that surviving against Mossad's reach required vigilance, counterintelligence, and the ability to strike back when least expected. The first major strike in this covert war came not on the battlefield, but in a Damascus suburb in 2008. Imad Mughniyeh, a founding commander of Hezbollah's military wing, was assassinated in a car bombing widely attributed to Mossad. For Hezbollah, it was a brutal reminder. Their leaders were never safe. This set off a wave of paranoia inside the organization. Phones were switched to secure lines. Movements were tracked with meticulous care, and counterintelligence units expanded overnight. Hezbollah understood that Mossad's strength wasn't just its operatives, it was its patience, its ability to wait years for the perfect moment to strike. Israel, however, saw Mughniyeh's death as proof of its ability to penetrate even Hezbollah's most secure circles. The game was on, and it would only intensify. Along the Israel-Lebanon border, both sides turned the region into one of the most surveilled strips of land on Earth. Mossad, alongside Israel's military intelligence, deployed drones and advanced radar systems to track Hezbollah's movements. Every new building in southern Lebanon was photographed, every unusual truck logged, every electronic signal intercepted. Hezbollah responded in kind. Using small, mobile teams, they set up observation posts disguised as agricultural shacks or homes. Villagers were often recruited as lookouts. Some reports suggest even shepherds were used as human alarms, tasked with noting unusual Israeli patrols and feeding the information back to Hezbollah's intelligence wing. It wasn't just soldiers watching soldiers anymore. It was spies watching spies. Behind the scenes, Mossad sought to infiltrate Hezbollah's networks directly. Recruitment attempts were constant. Lebanese citizens traveling abroad were approached with offers of money, protection, or even citizenship if they cooperated. Some cracked, some refused, and a few vanished altogether. Hezbollah, for its part, built one of the most robust counterintelligence apparatuses in the Middle East. They staged elaborate stings to flush out informants. In one case, a supposed Hezbollah operative in Beirut was unmasked as an Israeli asset only after months of carefully monitored communication. Publicly, Hezbollah announced such captures as proof that Mossad could be beaten at its own game. For every infiltration Mossad attempted, Hezbollah was determined to expose it, knowing that psychological warfare was just as powerful as physical strikes. The covert war was not only fought in alleyways and border towns, it was also waged in cyberspace. Mossad's cyber wing launched operations designed to disrupt Hezbollah's communications, jam their signals, and even compromise financial channels linked to their networks. But Hezbollah was learning. With support from Iranian cyber experts, they began building firewalls of their own, launching counter-hacks, and even tracking Israeli drone activity. The silent war of ones and zeros became just as critical as boots on the ground. Every intercepted message, every compromised server, every drone feed tapped into gave one side the edge over the other. It was a battle fought in silence, invisible to the world, yet with consequences that could set the entire border ablaze. For civilians along the border, life became a tense, waiting game. Farmers in southern Lebanon plowed fields under the gaze of Israeli drones, while residents in northern Israel built shelters in case Hezbollah rockets rained down. Neither side wanted to trigger an open war, but both knew that one mistake, one miscalculation, could ignite a conflict bigger than either side could control. And so the shadow war continued, each side testing, probing, and waiting for the other to slip. Hezbollah knew Mossad was inside their walls, watching. Mossad knew Hezbollah was learning, adapting, and striking back in ways more sophisticated than ever before. The midnight interception near Bint Jbeil was only one scene in this long, invisible war. For Mossad, it was a reminder that Hezbollah's eyes were sharper than ever. For Hezbollah, it was proof that Israel would never stop hunting them. This was not a conflict of armies, it was a war of ghosts, played out along one of the world's most volatile borders. And it was only the beginning. By the early 2010s, the border between Israel and Lebanon had become a chessboard, with Mossad and Hezbollah moving pieces in a deadly game of intelligence and deception. Unlike open war, where soldiers face each other across a battlefield, this fight unfolded in secret, one conversation overheard in a Beirut cafe. One drone flight too close to the border, one courier carrying a message that never reached its destination. Mossad, known worldwide for its reach and precision, worked tirelessly to plant operatives inside Hezbollah's network. Each recruitment was a slow, methodical process. Agents targeted businessmen, students, even Lebanese expatriates living in Europe or the Gulf. Offers of money, protection, or visas to the West were tempting for some. Others were blackmailed into cooperation, personal secrets weaponized into leverage. But Hezbollah's counterintelligence was no less relentless. They knew Mossad's playbook well and had built entire departments dedicated to sniffing out infiltrators. Internal surveillance within Hezbollah grew intense. Members were shadowed by their own comrades, their communications monitored, their loyalty questioned at the slightest sign of irregularity. Trust, once broken, was rarely forgiven. The rivalry reached new heights with the assassinations of key Hezbollah figures. After the killing of Imad Mughniyeh in Damascus, Hezbollah leaders were convinced Mossad had eyes and ears far deeper in their organization than they had ever imagined. Paranoia spread. Meetings were moved to secure underground bunkers. Convoys changed routes at the last second. Even mobile phones were abandoned for face-to-face conversations. Yet Mossad's shadow never lifted. Reports emerged of Israeli operatives planting listening devices in cars, homes, and offices across Lebanon and Syria. In some cases, entire networks of communication towers were compromised, giving Mossad real-time access to Hezbollah's chatter. Hezbollah struck back by uncovering and publicizing these devices, displaying them as trophies to show their supporters that they were not defenseless. Still, for every bug dismantled, another 2 were likely already in place. The 2010s also marked the rise of cyber warfare as a battlefield. Mossad's cyber units launched operations to disrupt Hezbollah's digital infrastructure, hacking into databases, rerouting funds, and even attempting to sabotage their supply chains. At times, Hezbollah operatives found their phones behaving strangely, GPS signals manipulated, or messages intercepted before reaching their destination. But Hezbollah, backed by Iranian cyber expertise, was not standing still. They developed their own digital countermeasures, creating secure encrypted networks and conducting offensive operations of their own. At least once, Hezbollah claimed to have intercepted Israeli drone feeds, watching in real time as Israel's most advanced surveillance tools circled above them. The silent war of code and encryption became just as vital as spies on the ground. Whoever controlled the flow of information controlled the battlefield. For Mossad, targeting Hezbollah's leadership was the ultimate prize. Removing a commander not only crippled operations, but also sent waves of fear through the ranks. Assassinations were designed to be precise, spectacular, and unmistakably Israeli. A motorcade blown apart in Damascus, a mysterious explosion in Beirut, a sudden disappearance of a mid-level operative, all whispered the same message. Mossad is watching, Mossad is waiting. But Hezbollah was learning too. Their counterintelligence units began baiting Mossad with false information, setting up decoys and controlled leaks. In one case, a supposed Hezbollah courier carried fake plans across the border, only for Mossad to act on the misinformation and expose one of their assets. It was a dangerous dance, with each side trying to outmaneuver the other without revealing just how much they really knew. One of the most remarkable aspects of this covert war was how deeply it touched ordinary life. Taxi drivers, shopkeepers, and even students became unwilling participants in the struggle. Mossad saw every interaction as a potential opportunity to recruit, while Hezbollah saw every stranger as a possible spy. Some Lebanese civilians were arrested on charges of collaborating with Israel, accused of passing on information as simple as the movement of trucks or the location of a warehouse. In villages across the south, rumors swirled about who might be on Mossad's payroll. Suspicion eroded trust, fracturing communities under the weight of fear. In northern Israel, residents of border towns lived under the constant drone of surveillance aircraft, knowing that Hezbollah too was watching, collecting data on their routines and waiting for the right moment to strike. The war had no clear front lines because, in truth, everywhere was the front line. By the late 2010s, both sides had refined their intelligence strategies to near perfection. Mossad relied on cutting-edge technology, satellites, drones, cyber infiltration, and long-term sleeper cells. Hezbollah relied on human intelligence, grassroots networks, and relentless counter-surveillance. Every intercepted phone call, every suspicious stranger in a marketplace, every unexplained signal burst across the airwaves mattered. Both sides knew that one slip, one lapse in vigilance, could mean disaster. This was not a war of armies. It was a war of shadows. Mossad hunted Hezbollah commanders. Hezbollah hunted Mossad operatives. Both sides struck, retreated, and struck again, never claiming victory, but never conceding defeat. And as the years passed, the tension only deepened. Each assassination, each foiled plot, each intercepted signal brought them one step closer to the moment when this covert war would spill into the open. Because in the silence of espionage, the loudest noise is the one that hasn't happened yet. The border, heavily guarded yet constantly violated in the shadows, was becoming the most dangerous line in the Middle East. And everyone knew the silence couldn't last forever. By the dawn of the 2020s, the covert war between Hezbollah and Mossad began to seep into the open. For years, both sides had fought in shadows, hacking, bugging, assassinating. But now, the pressure along the Israel-Lebanon border boiled over. The invisible war lines were beginning to flare into visible fire. For Israel, the strategy was simple: contain Hezbollah's growing arsenal before it became unstoppable. Intelligence reports showed thousands of rockets, precision-guided missiles, and new surveillance drones stockpiled in hidden bunkers across southern Lebanon. For Hezbollah, the strategy was equally clear: maintain deterrence, show strength, and prove to its supporters that no Israeli incursion could go unanswered. It was a fragile balance, and it didn't last. One summer evening, an Israeli drone flew deeper into Lebanese territory than usual. Its target was a suspected Hezbollah weapons cache disguised as a farm. But Hezbollah had been waiting. Their surveillance picked up the drone, and within minutes, a surface-to-air missile streaked into the sky. The drone went down in flames, its wreckage paraded on Lebanese TV as proof that Hezbollah could strike at Israel's most advanced technology. The message was clear: the shadows had boundaries. Cross them, and Hezbollah would respond. But Mossad and Israeli military intelligence saw the downing as a challenge. The next week, a mysterious explosion tore through a Hezbollah facility near the border. Officially, no one claimed responsibility. Unofficially, everyone knew. The people living closest to the border bore the brunt of this escalating silent war. In Lebanese villages, families went to sleep under the hum of Israeli drones, unsure if the buzzing meant surveillance or an imminent strike. In northern Israel, residents of small towns spent nights in bomb shelters as Hezbollah launched sporadic rocket barrages, often symbolic, but enough to sow fear. For civilians, life was suspended in tension. A farmer plowing his field might stumble upon buried communication cables. Children playing in courtyards grew used to the sight of low-flying drones. The line between spycraft and warfare blurred, turning ordinary life into part of the battlefield. As clashes along the border intensified, Mossad turned to psychological warfare. Agents planted false intelligence suggesting Hezbollah commanders were preparing large-scale offensives. At the same time, they spread rumors through Lebanese networks that certain Hezbollah figures were secretly cooperating with Israel. The aim was not only to confuse, but to sow distrust inside Hezbollah's ranks. Even whispers of betrayal could fracture unity. And Mossad knew paranoia could be as lethal as a bullet. Hezbollah's counterintelligence worked overtime to stamp out these rumors. But in a world where trust was already thin, even the suggestion of a traitor was enough to unsettle operatives. The war was no longer just about rockets or drones. It was about controlling the very narrative of reality. Hezbollah also escalated. Small drones, some homemade, and others upgraded with Iranian tech, began crossing into Israeli airspace. Their purpose varied, sometimes reconnaissance, sometimes probing weaknesses in Israel's vaunted Iron Dome defense system. A few were shot down immediately. Others managed to capture footage of Israeli positions before being neutralized. Each successful incursion was a propaganda victory. Hezbollah broadcasted the footage as proof that Mossad and Israel's military were not untouchable. For Israel, the incursions were an embarrassment, sparking debates about whether Hezbollah's capabilities were surpassing expectations. As the 2020s pressed on, it became clear that both sides were pushing closer to the edge. Every Israeli strike risked drawing a larger Hezbollah retaliation. Every Hezbollah incursion risked provoking a wider war. The border had become a pressure cooker, with Mossad and Hezbollah constantly testing each other's limits. Yet, neither side wanted a full-scale conflict. Not yet. The lessons of 2006 loomed large. When Israel and Hezbollah fought a brutal war, that left both scarred. The covert war of assassinations and intelligence was dangerous, but at least it was contained. A full war would ignite the region, and so they danced on the edge. Assassinations met with rocket fire. Drone strikes answered with counterattacks. Misinformation countered with propaganda. The silence of espionage was being drowned out by the low rumble of open conflict. By now, the line between Mossad's covert missions and the Israeli military direct strikes was nearly indistinguishable. Hezbollah's intelligence units reported constant activity along the border, unmarked vehicles, disguised operatives, drones circling like vultures. Mossad had become more aggressive, believing pressure could weaken Hezbollah before it became unmanageable. But Hezbollah was equally determined. Every strike, every assassination, every rumor only hardened their resolve. Their counterintelligence units grew sharper, their rockets more precise, their drones more sophisticated. The border was no longer just a line on a map. It was a living fault line, vibrating with tension. Both sides knew that one miscalculation could unleash a war neither could fully control. And in the silence before that storm, Mossad and Hezbollah sharpened their blades, waiting for the next shadow to move. The rivalry between Hezbollah and Mossad has never been confined to the borderlands of Israel and Lebanon. By the mid-2000s, the conflict spilled across the region, turning other countries into proxy battlefields where both sides tested their reach, patience, and endurance. Syria, Iraq, and even distant corners of Latin America became arenas where the covert war intensified. The outbreak of the Syrian civil war in 2011 changed everything. Hezbollah's decision to openly intervene on behalf of Bashar al-Assad brought them into direct confrontation with Israel's security establishment. For Mossad, Syria became both an opportunity and a nightmare, an unstable arena where Hezbollah operatives, Iranian advisors, and Syrian loyalists operated side by side. Israeli intelligence tracked convoys carrying weapons from Iran through Syria into Lebanon. Airstrikes were launched with precision, often targeting weapons depots or convoys just as they crossed critical points. Each strike was designed not only to destroy material, but to send a message. Israel would not allow Hezbollah to tip the balance of power with advanced weaponry. Hezbollah, meanwhile, adapted quickly. They shifted routes, concealed shipments within civilian traffic, and leveraged the chaos of war to mask their movements. What emerged was a brutal cat-and-mouse game in Syrian skies, where drones, radar systems, and human spotters all played their part. As Hezbollah's influence grew, Iraq became another arena of competition. Hezbollah operatives coordinated with local militias, many of whom shared Iran's ideology and were trained by the same advisors. Mossad watched these developments closely, fearing that a growing Hezbollah footprint in Iraq could create another staging ground for attacks against Israel. Reports surfaced of mysterious explosions at weapons depots across Iraq, sites allegedly connected to Iranian and Hezbollah-linked supply lines. Though Israel rarely admitted responsibility, the precision of these operations bore the hallmarks of Mossad's intelligence networks feeding into Israeli military strikes. For Hezbollah, Iraq was both a source of manpower and a pathway for resources. Fighters recruited and trained in Iraq later bolstered Hezbollah's presence in Syria, ensuring the group remained a formidable force despite the losses it endured. Perhaps the most unexpected theater of this covert war was Latin America. Decades earlier, Hezbollah had established networks among Lebanese diaspora communities, particularly in places like Venezuela, Paraguay, and Brazil. These networks were not just cultural or economic, they served as logistical bases for fundraising, smuggling, and intelligence gathering. Mossad, aware of these global tentacles, pursued them relentlessly. Operations were mounted in cooperation with local governments, sometimes resulting in arrests of suspected Hezbollah operatives or the disruption of financial networks, funneling money back to Beirut. Yet Hezbollah's resilience in these regions showed just how global their infrastructure had become. At the heart of this regional expansion lay Iran. Tehran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, particularly the Quds Force, provided Hezbollah with training, funding, and technology. For Mossad, the connection between Hezbollah and Iran was inseparable. Attacking one meant confronting the other. Israeli intelligence focused heavily on tracking Iranian advisors embedded with Hezbollah units, especially in Syria. Assassinations and airstrikes targeting these figures were not random. They aimed to weaken the very lifeline that kept Hezbollah supplied and operational. But Iran's commitment to Hezbollah only deepened with each strike. Sophisticated missiles, advanced drones, and cyber capabilities flowed into Hezbollah's arsenal, making the group not just a local militia, but a regional actor capable of challenging Israel's technological edge. The spread of the conflict came with costs. For Hezbollah, fighting on multiple fronts stretched resources and risked alienating parts of its Lebanese support base, weary of seeing young men return in coffins from Syria and Iraq. For Mossad, expanding operations across several countries meant spreading thin its operatives and risking exposure in hostile environments. Yet neither side relented. Each battlefield reinforced the perception that their struggle was not simply local, but existential. For Hezbollah, survival meant resisting Israel at all costs. For Mossad, ensuring Israel's security meant disrupting Hezbollah wherever it set foot. By the end of the 2010s, it was clear that the Hezbollah-Mossad conflict had transcended borders. No region was too distant, no battlefield too obscure. Every smuggling route, every training camp, every financial network became part of the chessboard. This was not just a war along Israel's border. It was a war without borders. A war where Mossad's reach clashed with Hezbollah's resilience, each side seeking dominance in a struggle that seemed destined to outlast generations. And as the regional flames grew hotter, both sides braced for the next phase of confrontation, one that threatened to bring the shadows into the light of open conflict.